Greetings, conversationalists across the fruited plain. Welcome. It's Erick Erickson here, and I'm delighted to have you. The phone number is 877-973-7425. If you want to be on the program, don't forget to text Erick, E-R-I-C-K, to 33777. I want to play a game. Can you spot the pattern? Can you spot the pattern? It's actually necessary, and I want to thank Robert. Robert probably doesn't want to be thanked. Robert is a progressive troll. Robert came after me yesterday because I said that restaurant reservations in the District of Columbia were up since President Trump cracked down on crime. And Robert insisted that I was lying, that that wasn't true, that he read about it in the New York Times, he saw people talk about it on MSNBC, that actually restaurant reservations had collapsed in Washington, D.C., and I was a liar. Robert is one of those progressives who gets his news from MSNBC and left-wing outfits, and Robert is regularly lied to, and Robert doesn't even realize he is being lied to by the American Press Corps. Yet Robert has been lied to. Peter Baker at the New York Times was one of the most prominent reporters to advance the story from a local TV station in Washington, D.C., that restaurant reservations were down 25% since Donald Trump cracked down on crime in Washington. That was the story in Washington at the local TV station, that restaurant reservations were down 25%. And Peter Baker pushed this story out on social media. It was talked about on left-wing news channels. Robert, the left-wing troll, heard about it. He got mad at me and insisted I was lying to my listeners by saying that restaurant reservations were up in Washington. Robert, I was right, and Peter Baker of the New York Times and the other media outlets were wrong. You see, the reason reservations were down is because last year in Washington, D.C., it was Restaurant Week. And you had a massive number of people getting reservations at restaurants to participate in Restaurant Week. And Restaurant Week was not this past week in Washington, D.C. this year. And what the local media outlet did is they looked at all the reservations in restaurants last year from some of the open resources out there like Open Table and the like. And they saw that last week, you had X number of reservations at restaurants. And this year you had a 25% decline. And look. They were wrong. They forgot. In fact, the local news station that started this all has now retracted their story and noted it's actually a 30% increase in reservations for restaurants when you factor out Restaurant Week and the participating restaurants in D.C. last year. 30% increase in reservations. I was right. They were wrong. And this left-wing troll who came after me insisting I was lying and needed to correct the record. Well, I've corrected the record for you, sir, but my audience was not lied to. You were lied to. Isn't it funny how the lie benefited the left-wing talking points? Last year, the New York Times, the Washington Post, CNN, MSNBC, USA Today, the Seattle Times, the Denver Post all ran stories about an apartment complex in Aurora, Colorado that Donald Trump highlighted, Fox News highlighted. They interviewed residents of the apartment complex in Aurora, Colorado, who were scared to death. It was a dilapidated old apartment complex. A lot of people were trying to move out of the apartment complex. They were poor. They were on government assistance, and Trinidad, the violent gang from Venezuela, had taken over. And there were home surveillance footage of men in the hallways with machine guns, not semi-automatic rifles, but automatic machine guns. And these news outlets insisted when Donald Trump highlighted this on the campaign trail and actually did a campaign event in Aurora, Colorado, that he was a lying racist and he was trying to stir up already heightened tensions over illegal immigration, and he was misrepresenting the situation, and it simply was not true. National media outlets insisted that there was not a problem. But it wasn't just national media outlets, it was also Democrats. Joe Biden and Kamala Harris denounced Donald Trump for making this attack. The local politicians in Denver and Aurora, Colorado did. The governor of Colorado did. They all said what Donald Trump was saying was simply not true. And Donald Trump was heightening tensions that already existed in this immigrant community and making matters worse. The New York Times did a big story about, well, it's complicated. Here's what's not complicated. Yesterday, the Department of Justice indicted 28 of the Trinidad gang members who lived in that apartment complex for narco trafficking, human trafficking, gun violence, sales of illegal guns, attempted murder, and a bunch of other crimes. 28 people in a single apartment complex were indicted by a federal grand jury in Colorado for a host, like 30-some crimes. 2 additional people who didn't live in the apartment complex, but were actually controlling the violence at the apartment complex, were also arrested and indicted. This is beyond an arrest. This is a federal indictment from a grand jury. It's not Pam Bondi just issuing charges. It's a federal grand jury that spent 9 months investigating what was going on, and they've indicted these people, and yet major national media outlets last year insisted there was not a problem. Completely unrelated from restaurant reservations in Washington, D.C., except for one thing. The mistake was designed to make the Republicans look bad and the Democrats look like truth tellers. The mistakes always go one way. Multiple media outlets led by the British Broadcasting Corporation, the BBC, 2 days ago, ran a story about a woman from Gaza who starved to death on Israel's watch. They have since retracted the story. She had leukemia, advanced leukemia, and had a heart attack. It was Israel that actually rescued her and got her to Europe for medical treatment before she died. But the initial story was that she was just another victim of the Israeli genocide. The story, the mistake, goes one way. This comes a week after a story about a child featured on the New York Times who was starved to death by the Israelis, and it turns out he had a severe birth defect and other health abnormalities, and he wasn't actually starved to death. He was dying because of congenital birth defects. The mistakes go one way. This came weeks after a story about Israel firing on starving Gazans who were in a food line who wanted help, and it turns out it was Hamas firing on them, not Israel. And that story incited a man in Boulder, Colorado to go out and gun down or fire, they use a homemade flamethrower and burn up Jewish supporters of Israel at a regular protest. He killed a Holocaust survivor. After hearing the story in the media, that only after he killed a Holocaust survivor did the media say, "Oops, our bad, wrong. Turns out it wasn't Israel." The mistakes always go one way. Anti-Israel, anti-Republican, all the mistakes, all the time, go to advance progressive talking points. Every single person listening to me right now has another example of the media making an egregious mistake to make the right look bad. And it happens about Donald Trump all the time. You know, I have a rule on my program now where if there's a big salacious story about Donald Trump in the press, I wait 24 to 48 hours before talking about it, much to the chagrin of some, because I know 9 times out of 10 it's going to be retracted. Like, for example, the story about Intel and the government wanting control of Intel, 10% of Intel stock. I waited to bring that story up until it was confirmed that it was actually something the Trump government wanted, and Howard Lutnick went on CNBC to say as much, and I think that's bad, and that's not a mistake, but it was a big story. It's like, I got to wait and see if this is real. Because there are ample stories about Donald Trump in the press that simply turn out not to be true, and the press runs with these stories. Remember back during Trump's first term, CNN ran a very salacious story about how James Comey was going to go testify in Congress about collusion with Russia or some such, or the Trump administration trying to pressure people in government to cover something up, and it turned out not to be true. It wasn't in his testimony. The mistakes always run one way. always to advance the left. And they're willing to cover stories up. They're willing to leave details out. Think about the Maryland man who was sent to El Salvador. Maryland father sent to El Salvador. Wasn't really a mistake. It was a willful leaving out of key details. He was not just a Maryland father. He was an illegal alien from El Salvador who went to Maryland, who the government believed might be tied to MS-13. They left out the key details. There was one a week or so ago about an Illinois man who was rounded up by the government. It turns out he too was an illegal alien. When they leave out key facts, it's designed to shape a story to benefit progressives. Now, here's the thing. You and I, we all know that this sort of stuff happens. But the press is actually in decline. The number of people who watch the news is in decline. The number of people who subscribe to newspapers is in decline. The number of people who get their news from alternative sources is actually on the rise. And oftentimes, unfortunately, it's grifters and charlatans taking advantage of it and starting news services for people who now, because of the internet, have lost their ability to discern and just tells them what they want to hear and tells them oftentimes stuff that's not true. There's a very prominent social media account yesterday showing a group of African immigrants who were trying to get to Italy. And as they were approaching the Italian coast, their ship overturned and a lot of people died. You could actually see the video of this ship, and it had like hundreds of people. I mean, there was no room to even walk on the ship, and it was starting to sink under the weight of people. As it got to Italy, it was taking on water, and it actually turned out to be a video from the Democratic Republic of Congo multiple years ago. There are people who want to tickle your ears. There are people who want to lie to you. There are people like Tucker Carlson now willing to platform people who want to rewrite history and make Winston Churchill the monster of World War II and Adolf Hitler was just misunderstood. It's happening on the right. It is. The people on the right who are doing this wouldn't have license or ability or room to do it but for the national mainstream media becoming so captured by the left and willing to lie to advance the left's agenda, willing to get stories wrong to advance the left's agenda. The left in the National Press Corps created the environment by which you can now be lied to by people on the right because the press decided to stop telling the whole story. They leave out details that might hurt the left. They shade details to benefit the left, and they're willing to make mistakes that always benefit the left. It is the National Press Corps that has created the environment. The very people who complain about disinformation and misinformation are the ones who give us so much misinformation and disinformation. They've opened the floodgates to others to do the same. And now their reaction is, how dare you do what we're experts at? And they've got a suicide wish. They actually don't want to fix themselves. Look at the Washington Post. Jeff Bezos starts cracking down on the liars of the Washington Post who are deeply pro-terrorist, deeply pro-Hamas, and they start flooding, they start taking early retirement and leaving. Because what does he want them to do? He wants them to take the side that is pro-America, pro-freedom, pro-democracy. They're like, well, I'm not writing pro-democracy stuff. I'm just writing that the Democrats are the Democratic Party, and so anything against the Democrats is a threat to democracy. I mean, that is kind of it, too, that anything that impacts the Democrats is a threat to democracy. Rewriting congressional districts is a threat to democracy unless the Democrats do it. The press created the environment by which all these grifters and charlatans can stand up and take advantage of you because the press has been taking advantage of you. The mistakes they make always, without fault, always benefit the left. And that should tell them something, but they already know it and don't care.